We're at a very critical point in that agenda. President Obama laid out in his April 2009 speech in Prague the direction in which the United States wanted to move, and that basically meant a reduced role for nuclear weapons, a path that would eventually end in no nuclear weapons, and he presented a number of ideas for making a significant progress in that direction, including getting an agreement with Russia for a lower level of nuclear forces, an agreement to remove some of the material around the world that could be used to make nuclear weapons that had inadequate controls, a number of other things. Some of those things have been achieved. We have an agreement with Russia, but we want more and deeper cuts to be negotiated with Russia. And so we're at a very critical point now in his agenda in which he's actually going to try to implement some of the next steps. So there's obviously some suspense about whether or not he'll be able to find a partner in President Putin that will allow us to make negotiated reductions. Even if we don't have success negotiating lower levels, I think there are some steps that President Obama can take as executive branch decisions to move in that direction. From my understanding, President Obama is going to address the U.S.-German relationship and its importance for the United States. Arms control is obviously a part of that. We've been security partners with Germany now for a long time, and it's been a very important part of our bilateral relations. There is an expectation that the President's going to announce some additional policy guidance for his own government on future nuclear forces. And we're in the midst of some delicate conversations between President Putin and President Obama. He will have just had a meeting with Putin at the G8 summit. He will then have another one in September at the G20 summit. So this will happen between those two events. There's some suspense about whether or not he will make any announcements about arms control. I'm almost sure that he will talk about arms control because it's an important part of our relationship and our joint efforts to increase security. But it might also happen a little bit later in the summer because there are some other important anniversaries coming up of a very significant arms control speech by John F. Kennedy 50 years ago next month. So not clear to me exactly when we will hear these dramatic announcements. I will just elaborate a bit on it. We have in the case of both North Korea and Iran serious non-proliferation concerns. In the case of North Korea, they already have a few nuclear devices. They've tested these nuclear devices underground. It's not clear that North Korea can actually miniaturize them and put them on the tip of a ballistic missile. If they can, it would more relate to a medium-range ballistic missile, one that could affect South Korea or Iran. But one thing we can be pretty confident of, and that is that North Korea has no intercontinental range ballistic missiles that could threaten the United States. So it was a very strange thing to go through a spring in which North Korea was making threats to launch preemptive nuclear attacks on the American mainland. That was obviously hyperbole. It wasn't reality at all. But a lot of Americans and others reacted as if the North Koreans could actually do that. So that's why we need to separate bombast from bombs. There is a difference between these rhetorical threats and actually being able to do something. And in the case of Iran, it's even more extreme in a way because the press treats the Iranian threat as something very real or at least imminent. The fact is that, according to the U.S. intelligence services, Iran has not even decided whether or not to actually build a nuclear weapon. So no one thinks that Iran has a nuclear weapon right now, and they certainly do not have a long-range ballistic missile to put it on. they have not even tested such a system ever. And in spite of expectations, the last 2 years has been very inactive in terms of even medium-range ballistic missile tests. So it's very important to separate, even in the case of these countries that provide a lot of real reasons for worry, it's important not to get carried away and to give them make them even taller than they actually are.